Hey, everybody. Todd Linder here with LaunchPoint. And in this conversation, I'm going to be talking with Allie, who has a really awesome story transitioning from ministry into a marketplace job. And we're going to talk about that transition, how she got there, what were some of the challenges, what were some of the things she's experienced, both internally and then externally as she was making that transition, and where she is now. So, Allie, thanks so much for hanging out with me today and hanging out with us. So, would love to just start off, tell us a little bit about who you are and how you ended up in ministry in the first place.
Yeah. So my name's Allie. I'm from Georgia, grew up outside of Atlanta. And after college, I had a couple of ideas about what I wanted to do and tried a year-long internship and at a camp that does ministry. And then from there, went totally different direction for a few years and worked in a more corporate job. And then went back to work at that same camp a few years afterward. And I was on camp staff doing ministry for 10 years between a couple of different camp properties and a couple of different roles. So today I work outside of ministry at a co-working and meeting office space in Atlanta.
Okay, which is a really cool space, by the way. So, if you're in
Yes.
Atlanta, shout out to Rome.
Yes.
Little shout out there. Really cool space. So, you went from college ministry, well, not college ministry. You went from graduating from college, doing ministry, marketplace, ministry for a longer period of time, and now you're back in the marketplace. So tell me a little bit about what drew you to ministry in the first place.
Yeah. I was working at a really great company that had really good culture. And it was all in commercial real estate, which I didn't have a background in. I got a job there through a connection and liked working there, had really great coworkers and teams and incredible supervisors that I worked with along the way. But ultimately, I just got to a point where it's like, I feel no purpose with my day to day. And that was one of the things that just had me for maybe a year thinking of like, I know it's not here long term. What does that mean for what I want to do with my life? I was in my mid 20s at that point. So um, I just started thinking through that. I went to like a career counselor, or a counselor that also specialized in career counseling. Talked to some former um, like an intern coordinator, some people that I trusted, and just had this feeling like along the way of like, I think I need to feel more purpose behind what I'm doing day to day. So that
Yeah.
in addition to going in and feeling like energized by what you do, that I also believed in like the product, like what are we doing day to day? And that led me back to ministry in a more full-time role. I had some good advice from some people a little bit older than me of like, hey, just because you did this before, you don't have to do that specific thing. You can wait and you can be patient for the right role that would be a better fit long term to happen and come open. And it did. I had a great job for a long time and I really enjoyed it. So that's what led me to ministry.
Yeah. I think you said some really great stuff there, Ali, specifically around the importance that community and guidance played in your
Mhm.
life. Can you talk a little bit more about, because you would maybe say the same thing for, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, about your transition out of ministry, but even your transition into ministry, it sounds like you were really intentional to pull some specific people into your circle. Can you tell a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I think part of it is personality based. Like, um, each time I've looked for a new job, every time I've been like, there are so many jobs in the world. And it was like, and I
Yeah.
could do so many of them. Um, and just feeling like, not, I personally didn't bring the clarity. So I needed to verbally process things, but I also needed other people to be like, it'll be okay. And just to encourage and like help point you in the right direction, in some ways. But mostly it's sometimes just to affirm like what I was thinking of, like, I feel like I want something that's like this, um, or that allows me to do these things. So a lot of it is like that verbal processing, and just like affirmation of like what you're already like feeling, like in your gut feeling. So I think that's been helpful. And just, I mean, anytime that I've had the chance to have people who have walked more years and experienced more life, that's been helpful. Like just the assurance of like, it's gonna be okay.
Yeah.
Not every decision is going to be a make or break life decision. You can like allow some room for like just to dial back maybe the intensity of some of those things.
Yeah. When I talk to people who are, and I know the phase we're talking about now is going from marketplace into ministry, but when I talk to a lot of people who are considering making that transition, you said something that I think is really important is you can kind of take the pressure off a little bit. Like it feels like there's so much pressure of like you have to pick the right thing and it has to come now. And in reality, it's important to know like what you want to do and get the clarity on what you want to do, which is where you go talk to a counselor who specializes in some of that stuff, or you get the people around you who really, really know you and can like put wind in your sails in that particular direction. But there's also nice to have people who just love you enough to be honest with you, to sit and listen with you, and can say, "You're you're taking this a little too seriously," or "You're being too hard on yourself on that." Is
Yeah.
that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. I think it's just like when you're in the middle of it, it feels like so intense, and it is an important decision. But sometimes it's like helpful to zoom out a little bit. I mean, like, so few of us are going to be doing any one job for our whole lives. That it's helpful to remember like this could just be like the next right thing for me to do, for however long that is. And
Yeah,
that could
that's
be
awesome.
like 10 years, or that could be two. Um, and that is fine. It's not like a mark of success or failure in the middle of it.
Yeah, totally. So you spent 10 years working at
Mhm.
this camp and a job that you were really excited about, you really enjoyed. What made you want to make the change?
Uh-huh. Back out of ministry.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. Yeah, so I had worked 8 years in Georgia and then spent 2.5 years in Texas at a new camp property, which can be like working at a startup. I mean, it is working at a startup, in like the most relatable ways. You're like busy all the time. People are wearing multiple hats. You're getting by with less, and there's a lot of energy and a lot of like everyone is, on board with a lot of intensity, a lot like a startup. And I moved to Texas in July of 2019. So the timing of that is also pretty
Very
um,
interesting. Yeah.
pretty relevant to later. I lived in a very, very remote, small part of Texas, and was there for the first, what is that, few months before COVID and stay-at-home stuff started happening, which, that just dramatically changed everything for everyone. But in the context of where I was, in some ways, it stalled a lot of the like figuring out what life looked like outside of my job, and going in because I was stepping into a different leadership position than I had been in before. Um, the one hesitation I had was I know it's going to be intense, and I don't want the only thing true about my life out there is that I had this job, that I was this job title. So we just went into COVID, and some of those avenues of like building regular rhythms in life outside of my job just evaporated. So I felt we got to have like a first summer of camping in 2021, even though it was modified and adjusted.
So 2 years later, after you
Yes.
started that job.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Yeah. What we were doing, like a full season, like school season, weekend camping, that sort of thing, the entire time. And during
Oh,
COVID,
okay.
like, modified and so much uncertainty, like everywhere else. So we were doing what we were used to doing at any other camp property. Just summer was totally different. So we were able to do a summer there, and I felt like a lot of like tie and responsibility to be able to see that summer through. But it was the first summer season I went into feeling like this could be my last one, and that not feeling like intimidating, like, oh no, of feeling like this could be my last go around with this for now or forever. And that felt okay. Like within my own heart and mind, it felt like okay instead of unsettling for that to not be what I did.
Yeah.
So at the end of that summer, I had already kind of reached the point where I was like, I knew it was time. And it just felt like peaceful, although there was anxiety because I didn't know what was next. And I was, especially in this scenario, was nervous about letting people I loved down, because we lived life together and worked together. Um, and I was like, what if they're disappointed in me,
Yeah.
even though knowing them and having had longstanding relationships with them, that didn't actually make sense. Like that wasn't rational. But in the moment, feeling like I'm going to tell them like, this is too hard. I gotta go. And was nervous about how that would be received, even though like in the most rational mindset, that wasn't a realistic thing that they would have thought or said to me. So
Yeah. Do you feel, I think that's really important point to talk about. Do you feel like you only realized that you use the word rational, that it wasn't 100% rational thought process afterwards, or was there confidence that was built up during the leading process?
yeah, um, I think the first time I was able to like say like, hey, I think I'm needing to make this change for my own life, to my direct supervisor, which she had also been previously, before being my boss, had been a mentor. So we had a relationship previously, that just kind of had to be altered while we were where I was working directly for her. So
Yeah.
um in that conversation, I really felt like, and afterward, I was like, I really felt like it was like the Holy Spirit prompted her to ask the right question in the right way that made it feel like, oh, I can say, I need something different for my life. Um,
Wow.
and felt, um, I mean, I'm not surprised, like either in the moment or in like retrospect, I'm not surprised by how she handled it, because I've watched her handle other situations and with other people. I've encountered her responding to me in really graceful ways. So she did, and was very much more on the side of like, hey, I care more about you than about you being in this job that you're in right now. And I want the best for you, and I can get on board with that.
Man.
Like, if you don't
Yeah.
feel like this is best for you, then I can get on board. And she and I walked through like a process of like conversation, like, okay, we don't have to solve this all today. We have weekly check-ins. We'll just continue to check in on it. And we just continue to have a conversation. So I guess to your original question, in the moment, it was, yeah, if I had paused long enough in any one of those moments, I'm like, that's so silly to think that I'd be met with like outright disappointment or someone being angry with me for being like, I want to move back home, which happens all the time. People
Right.
move back home all the time. But yeah, in the moment, you have so much going on and you're like in everything that it feels a little bit harder to like do that zooming out.
Yeah. And that's so true, right? When we're in the hard stuff, it's hard to get that perspective, be a little bit more objective. I mean, I was literally on the phone with somebody not an hour before this conversation, and they're saying to me, I'm scared to talk to they work for a church, and they're saying, I'm scared to talk to just people who come to our church, that it will come back around to the pastor and I'll get in trouble or they'll be disappointed in me. Exactly what you're saying. But what's so interesting, and there is a degree of like, maybe some people in leadership are not trustworthy in that way, and can't separate our value that we bring to the organization versus our value that God's given us. But what's so cool about what you realize that I want to point out is you took a step back and you really said, no, I can trust this person because they've already proven themselves. And so I can essentially tell my fear that you're wrong, and I can
Mhm.
take the first step forward. It's not like you jumped in head first and were like, here's everything.
Yeah.
But you could take the first step because you looked at them in the past. And we can do that. We can look at the people who are in authority over us and say, have they proven themselves in the past to be trustworthy? And if they have, maybe the fear is more about us being disappointing rather than them being disappointed
Yeah.
in us, and that can hinder a lot of things. So how do some of those conversations go down? Because I would imagine, especially in ministry, I would imagine that sometimes having a conversation with the boss, like, I don't really know if I'm supposed to be here anymore. You don't want to pull the God card,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
how did some of those conversations go down? Because I could see that being an interesting thing to navigate.
Yeah. Yeah, because there were a few things that you're just trying to sort out because it wasn't like I was giving a 2 week notice. And I think part of my irrational fear was like, this train is moving so fast that if I say I need off, that I will be met with, okay, well, the best thing for camp is to get you to move along. And
Oh, wow.
I don't have what's next ready. So that was part of like, well, what if I'm then put on this like timeline that is too quick for me? Where it wasn't, I wasn't giving my 2 week notice because I didn't have something lined up yet. Which I don't know if it's always as a um, acceptable thing in the marketplace. So this is probably one of those areas where having those relationships and being in ministry and being able to talk about like, this is what the Lord's doing in my life, and what I'm feeling like, like where I'm being led. Those aren't really conversations you always get to have in non-ministry jobs. So I think we talked a little bit just about like her asking like, well, what are you thinking about? Because I think she kind of transitioned in some ways, not to being like my supervisor in those conversations, but to being my friend and like a confidant. So we just had some conversations that were like that, where I was like, I don't know. My current job title doesn't exist many other places. And then we also talked about just like the best way, like when to tell like the leadership team I was on, like my direct team that I supervised, and then just like our broad, like when is the timing of these conversations instead of it being like trickle out information of like just clearly communicating this thing and here's why. And then we talked about a timeline, which I think both of us were on the same page of that would be the kindest thing for everyone involved. Not to be like pushed out the door, but to have like something concrete in my mind, especially since I was moving homes too. I was moving a few states away. Like I knew where I wanted to move to, but I didn't have the job yet. So it was not as easy as just switching jobs. So we talked about time frame, and it's just like, well, I would like to be able to drive home for the holidays and not come back and then pack up. So we had conversations about timing, and that helped both sides, I think. So those were a lot of our conversations in that like maybe like month and a half, 2 months between the initial conversation and then when I actually was leaving.
Okay, so what was your time frame? I think there's some really good stuff in there that may help people, give them some ideas of some of those conversations, because I do want to get back to my question, but when someone is in a role of like a pastor or a mentor and a boss, that can get confusing.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you navigate that? Because you speak into my life spiritually, you may have access to some things that I would never tell just like an ordinary boss, but you
Mhm.
also can affect whether I get a paycheck or not.
Yeah.
And so from the beginning of your conversation to when you actually left, what was that timeline?
It was probably late August, early September, late August, I would guess, was when we initial conversation happened. And then I was, my last day was heading into Thanksgiving.
Okay. So a couple months.
Yeah.
About,
Mhm.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
So changing gears a little bit here, Allie, as you were thinking about making the change, getting in the job application process, searching for some jobs, what were some of the challenges that you encountered as you were trying to make that change?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest challenges I had was trying to figure out like one, where to start. Because I got back to like there's so many jobs out in the world. And at the time it was like a very positive job market. There were a lot of jobs.
Yeah, I
Well,
think I read a stat the other day that
yeah,
LinkedIn has 15 million open jobs.
yeah,
So if it feels overwhelming, it's because it is.
yes. Um, you're like, where do I even start? Because I was envious of every friend I had who was like a teacher, and they're like, yes, I'm a teacher. So if I switch jobs, and I don't want to get out, don't want to get out of teaching, I'm going to look at schools. I'm like, gosh, I know it's not that simple, but that sounds so much simpler. um, so I had that initial feeling of like, where do I even start? I also was thinking, how do I translate what I've done? Because I think many people, when they first hear like my work background, that I worked at a camp, they assume I was like a camp counselor or
Yeah.
like I facilitated um like small team adventure building, and I'm like, nope, nope. Didn't do that at all.
I did not
um
push kids off the rope swing.
didn't I did, but
That wasn't
it
in the job description.
that wasn't my primary. I'm like, but how do I translate that I did a big kid job to people who don't have a reference point, to what would have been included, and like how do you, because I wasn't altogether done. I was looking and considering jobs that would have also been in within ministry, and not just the like regular world. So trying to figure out like, okay, well, for me, what would be going toward comfort just to escape what I was in, but wouldn't actually be the best fit. Would just be like, well, I'm just going to change the environment. When that really wasn't it. I think the Lord was like, no, this is a time to rest from this. Um, so just trying to figure out how to communicate the legitimacy of my experience, to companies that didn't have a reference point. I eventually lucked out. Like the company I work for now has people who are familiar enough with the ministry I worked for that it wasn't, I mean, I still get questions of like, where I'm like, oh, you think I slept in cabins and during summer with kids, and I very much wouldn't have done it for 10 years. But they had enough of a reference point for me to talk about the experience I had in the realm of hospitality and leading teams and people and training and developing and all those really applicable skills. But I think at first it just felt like a potential uphill battle. Like I might not get past submitting a resume for things that I feel legitimately qualified for. Partially because, that happens all the time, but also it's like, well, is some of it that they look at what I've worked for and they're like, okay, they're not able to make sense of that to enough to move me along in the process.
Yeah. So it sounds like, was that like a fear you had, or that was the experience that you had, that you would apply for jobs and it was just getting hit wall?
Yeah. Well, I don't know how much of that you can like know is happening, because it's a very consistent experience for people, no matter what, that you submit an application and you never hear back. You're like,
It's true.
just confirmation you received it. That'd be great. That'd be courteous.
Right.
um, so I don't know how much you can like untangle, because it's not like you're getting that feedback. And I'm aware that that's something other people experience, even if their whole background is in corporate like environments or the market in general. So I don't know how much of that I could say directly is like, this happened. But I do think like, I was like, okay, if I get to a point where I'm interviewing, I'm going to have to figure out how to describe this. And even like making my resume, I had 2 resumes, one that was specific toward ministry that had different language about what I did, and another that broke down a lot of what I did to numbers and the normal resume speak that you see. And I didn't refer to the places I worked as ministries. I said nonprofit organizations, just to eliminate that as a possibility. So I was very conscious of it and how I first pitched myself in cover letters or resumes, and tried to tailor what I was providing to something that would translate the easiest on paper. So
Yeah.
it was,
And
yeah.
that's an important distinction to understand, that the first thing you said was lots of people get rejected, whether they have ministry on their resume or not. And
Mhm.
so you can't assume that's the reason why, even
Mhm.
though we do get a lot of feedback that once you do get into the interview, it's like, what were you doing? And so there is the importance of trying to figure out, how do I translate this in a way that actually makes sense? So how did you get into some of those interviews where you felt more successful for jobs or companies that you got excited about?
Mhm. I think, well, I was also fortunate that my job search didn't take an extended amount of time, in
It's
part
awesome.
because of the market. So I didn't, fortunately, have to walk through the process again and again over a course of months. Like I had my job when I left Texas in November. I knew I was starting my new job at Rome in December, and just got to have the holidays off. So, um,
Awesome. Did you
it,
connect with somebody who worked at Rome? How did that go down?
yeah. So, I was familiar with the company from people having offices, and actually, the ministry I worked for that some people do have offices at Rome's, or they've hosted events or meetings there. So I was familiar in that way. There's actually someone who used to work at Rome, who also worked for the ministry I worked with. And we didn't know each other well. It was just kind of like this. I first reached out to the talent acquisition person at Rome on LinkedIn. And I just said, here's my situation. Here's what I've been doing. I am planning to move back at this point. I'm looking for employment in Atlanta. I think I have a lot of alignment with the culture and the like the mission vision of Rome. And I'd love to learn more about opportunities there. But I originally was looking to talk to the person I had a faint connection with. Because I'm like, he knows. And so, but he wasn't on LinkedIn. So it didn't really work. I was like, well, I guess this person's going to have to do. And just doing like that step of like, I'm just going to reach out and say exactly what I'm contacting them for. So just be like, I'm looking for a job. I think I like what y'all do and I want to know more. So I don't remember having as much like real feedback from other companies because I just wasn't in the process that long.
Okay. Well, what's really interesting about what you said, Allie, which is what I hear a lot, is when you are just genuine and honest with people, they usually return that same sentiment, right?
Mm-hmm.
They usually mirror that. And so if you're trying to like sell yourself and talk about how awesome you are, people are going to feel that and they feel sold to. It's like
Mm-hmm.
the watch salesman on the streets of New York City, or the person in the mall who's like trying to get you to buy the phone case, or I don't know the last time anybody went to a mall, but like, or the person who's like trying to get you the perfume sample. You're like consciously avoiding them because
Yeah.
like in Costco now, I avoid the AT&T salespeople. Sorry, AT&T salespeople in Costco, because for some reason they always come talk to me, and I'm just not there to get sold. Like I don't
Mm-hmm.
want that. But when you have that genuine approach of like, hey, here's my situation, people respond well to that, and it worked
Mm-hmm.
out for you. So where are you now? Tell me, what was the job you landed, and then where are you right now?
Yep. So I am the general manager at one of Rome's workspaces in Atlanta, and see Todd every day as well. But leading a team day to day operationally, and getting a chance to like develop the people who I supervise directly, which is really great. And yeah, just making sure like the ship is running smoothly. Um, primarily and like being support for the rest of our team, and making sure like looking for touch points of like, okay, this could help ease some burden or stress in this area if I just do this or step in here. A lot of what happens when you manage teams, like being free up enough to be able to find the ways that you can help.
Yeah. And
So
you have some like people development, leadership development type responsibilities outside of that role as well, right?
yes. Yeah, we have an internal like talent development team that I've been asked to participate in, which has been awesome.
Very
We're
cool.
we're a company that's young enough to where that's not all hammered out yet. And we're scaling to the point where there's a need for it, moving from being just like a young company to like a scaling, more established company and more and more employees. But with that, it's like, oh, we can't just like always figure this out as we go, maybe how they have had to in the past. So this team is kind of on point to provide clarity as far as what the development needs are and what people can expect when they're an employee at Rome. And then creating and providing deliverables for certain avenues. for people to use in one-on-ones or leadership or training classes while they're on staff.
Yeah. I think it's really cool that you've had the opportunity to not just sit in this general manager role, but also you do have a lot of other experience developing people, and you've gotten to showcase some of that now that, and you have this other responsibility where you get to do some of that stuff that's like really fun for you. And you and I have had conversations about like you want to go get your master's in like organizational leadership type stuff because you love that stuff, and you've
Yeah.
gotten the opportunity to do that. One last question before we wind it down. Did you start in a general manager role at Rome, or did you start somewhere else?
I started at the same location I am now, and was the position I was hired for was an assistant general manager, and then I got a title bump a couple months in. So same thing the entire time. Like,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So they just said, "You're so awesome at this. Let's just
So
go ahead
amazing.
and give you
Yeah.
the title above."
Well, we can
It's,
tell already.
yeah, yeah. Okay. Last question for you, Allie. What's one piece of advice that you would give to somebody who's looking to transition from ministry into non-ministry or some sort of marketplace job?
Yeah. One piece of advice. I would say the biggest challenge I've had has been on the back end of like kind of unwinding, like not having that ministry being my day to day and like my identity and immediate community. I think some of like that I knew going into the like as I was planning and getting ready to make that transition. But you really can't know what that's going to be like until you live through it and like are either in it or on the outside of it finally to be like, yeah, that's even when you don't really know until you're experiencing it. So I think just preparing and like allowing yourself time and space, that it's not necessarily going to just be like pops into place and feels completely normal immediately. So I think sometimes depending on the background of why you're leaving ministry, you can be like, this is going to be a fix to some of these other things. And instead just giving yourself a little bit of space to just experience the change, and not feel like you have to have processed to a certain point, or that you have to mentally be in a like all of a sudden like everything's fine. Everything's fine. That was no big deal to leave that big part of my life. So I think maybe just some, being generous with yourself, as far as like what you need for time for that to feel the case.
Yeah, man, give yourself space, give yourself grace to make the transition and not feel like you have to have it perfect
Yeah.
or have it all figured out, or that you're gonna be 100% okay when you
Yeah.
make the transition.
Yeah.
Um, Allie, this is so great. Thank you so much for spending time with me. I think our conversation is going to be super helpful for some people to navigate the transition better and to think of even some creative ways that they can do it from where they are in both a respectful way, in an honoring way, but also in a productive way with the people around them. So, again, thanks so much. And if someone wants to just randomly reach out to you because they're like, your story sounds like my story, help, or hey, your story was so encouraging, thank you. What's the best way they can do that?
I guess I'm on LinkedIn. I can't remember if there's anything weird about my handle, um, or anything like that. But yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Allison Dunivant is my name.
Okay. Well, we'll tag you in the post
Yeah.
so that people will be able to find that a little bit easier. Awesome. Allie, again, thanks so much for your time.
All right.
And
Thank
we'll
you.
see you very soon.
Okay. Bye.